My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Michael Kanbergs. It's May 29th, 2025, and we're at Taborly Wines in Portland. And Michael, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
First question, why wine?
Why wine? Yeah, gosh, I think like first off, because it's delicious, right? You know, that's the obvious answer. I grew up with folks who drank a little bit. They weren't collectors, but wine was a part of the meals we had at the table. It was a part of, it seemed like a part of the good life, so to speak. And it seemed like something you were supposed to like, you know, kind of like classical music or reading. It just felt like, yeah, you do this. This is a thing you're supposed to dig. So it was really easy for me when I moved to my now wife's hometown of Petaluma, which is like, you know, more or less the heart of wine country in Sonoma County, to follow that thread, pull on that string a little bit and just pursue wine. Mm-hmm. I think that deliciousness was probably second. It was intellectual intrigue first, you know. Seemed like this subject that had a lot of depth to it, and you could explore it in all kinds of different directions. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, deliciousness came along. I think there was a version of wine in my head, an intellectual version of wine that became really interesting. The idea of wine as an inexpensive time machine. I use that to talk to people a lot about wine. I'm like, wine is the cheapest time machine you can buy, tongue in cheek, right? And that morphed over the years to a metaphor of wine as a window pane. Wine as being like this transparent, when it's made well, when it's made honestly and authentically, a transparent lens that you can see geography, geology, cultural history, political history, all kinds of different elements that make the world interesting through, while making you feel great and being delicious. And more I find myself turning to wine, the importance of wine, the why of wine, as political and moral. I'm really interested these days in the morality of wine. I'm not interested in wines that don't have some kind of moral fiber to them, that don't express a morality of some sort. That to me is really, really important. I want to know, I think the most salient question you can ask about a vineyard is, does someone live there? Mm-hmm. Or would you be comfortable if your kids were playing there? Mm-hmm. You know, if the answer to that is no, either of those questions, I'm less interested in carrying the wine in my shop. I'm less interested in putting it in my body. And I think wine is, now it's a model. It's tricky because it's this object of affluence, right? It's stratified experiences and the ways that people can access it. But it also presents a model for responsible farming, mm-hmm. For farming that compensates the farmers and the workers adequately, appropriately even, which is really hard in our food supply chain. And so I think following that thread that wine has, following its lead, is important for our food industry in general. You know, I see there's a lot of great farmers here in Oregon, a lot of great farmers internationally that are kind of leading the path for sustainability, both environmentally and fiscally. And I think, yeah, that's why wine these days. It's also still really delicious.
I'm going to come back to some of that because I'm really curious about that, wine morality especially. We're going to talk about that. But let's talk about you a little bit before wine. Tell us about where you were born and raised and kind of your path into adulthood.
Yeah, grew up in Alameda, California, a little island in the San Francisco Bay, to a couple of former hippie parents. Yeah, we'll describe them that way. Yeah, my mom grew up in Alameda in the same house that I grew up in. She wasn't born there, but moved there when she was really, really young and lived there, you know, away from it for the first 6 months or so of her life, and then maybe another 6 months in her late teens, mm-hmm. and then lived in that house otherwise her whole life. She still lives in the same house. My dad was born in Germany. His parents were World War II refugees from Latvia. And my parents met in Oakland, in Berkeley, in the 60s. Well, actually in the 70s. I think their first date was going to a Grateful Dead show. No, not a Grateful Dead show. Commander Cody? I think it was Commander Cody in 1973. Yeah, yeah. My dad ran an auto shop he was an auto mechanic, and my mom was a homemaker and home educator. So I was homeschooled. That was part of my upbringing. I'm the second youngest of 5 kids, with a pretty big span between us. There's a couple years between my younger brother and myself, and then between him and the oldest sibling, there's 18 and a half years to the day. So massive spread. My poor mother, right? She did it to herself. Maybe that's the one we edit out. Yeah. She, let's see, grew up on the island, homeschooled, grew up in a Christian family. So church was a really big part of our lives. My life, at least. It was kind of interesting the way our family was. It wasn't an important part of like the older kids' lives, but for my brother and I, it really was. That was our being homeschooled, and I was homeschooled all the way through high school, from elementary school all the way through high school. That was a really big part of our socializing and kind of understanding of the world in general. A lot of formative elements for me there, and then lots of unraveling, unwinding, and deconstruction after the fact. But yeah, let's see. I was into baseball growing up. I played a lot of baseball. I was into reading. I read a lot of books. And after, I guess the big formative thing for me is that when I was 14 and a half, my dad passed away. He died in a mountain bike accident. Pretty rough. Happened right in front of me and my brother. Just a gnarly, formational experience. One that you look back on now and you can see how all the actual good things in my life that exist wouldn't have happened without that. But at the time, it was just absolutely rupturing, right? We were really fortunate to have a great community around us and have the church. That was a really important part of stability in my family at that moment in time. We just got a lot of comfort, a lot of support from the people around us. Became complicated later on, but good at the moment, After, kind of typical high school stuff, typical, girlfriends, hanging out, getting in a little bit of trouble, but I was mostly a good kid. Went to junior college for a year, and in my first semester of junior college at Chabot in California, it was 2001, and right in the middle of the semester, right in the beginning, 9/11 happened and kind of struck a chord, changed everything. I petered out of that school. I didn't have a whole lot of drive, even though I was decent at school stuff. Didn't have a whole lot of drive for that particular school. Didn't feel connected to community. A lot of my good friends had moved away. The friend group I had there, good group of dudes, but everyone kind of lived far away from each other. Just didn't have that thisness of community. The next fall, moved down with the same group of friends. We moved to Santa Barbara, and I lived in Santa Barbara for a year. Thought I was going to be a film major at the time. Was really into writing about film, really into movies. Still love film, big part of my life. And let's see, halfway through my second semester there, I was a sad emo boy and wrote some indie acoustic guitar singer-songwriter songs and sent them, as you do back in the day, on AOL Instant Messenger to everyone I knew. One of those people was a girl I went to summer camp with, a girl named Meredith DeVardo, and she loved them and asked her mom to send me a $5 check so I could send her a CD of the songs. Which I did, because $5 was a really meaningful amount of money to me at the time. I was dirt poor in Santa Barbara. I remember going to a taqueria and getting a burrito, and the difference between a rice, bean, and cheese burrito and a rice and bean burrito was meaningful in terms of money. I'll get the rice and bean and just stock up at the salsa bar, So that $5 CD was important. I ended up kind of just dropping out of that second semester at Santa Barbara. I worked at a summer camp, the same summer camp that Meredith and I actually kind of first met at in the Santa Cruz Mountains that summer. And then after that summer camp ended, I moved back to Petaluma with Meredith. And we knew pretty early that we wanted to get married. That was 2003. And that's kind of when the wine bug hit, to kind of bring it back to wine a little bit. I was 20, wasn't yet 21, but you know, fairly like liberal household. So we'd have like a sip of wine with dinner, that kind of thing at Meredith's house. I lived with her and her family, so like lived with her parents. And Petaluma being wine country, it was like osmosis, like wine was in the air. And I remember the first two wines that like struck me immediately were a La Crema Pinot Noir from Carneros. No, Shug Pinot Noir from Carneros. So it was La Crema later on from Russian River. And then a Guigal Côte d'Aron. And that was the first time where I was like, wow, wine can taste like black pepper, like olives. It doesn't have to be fruity. This is wild. Transferred, went to the junior college there, and that really stuck in Santa Rosa. So Santa Rosa Junior College, once I lived in Petaluma. And then transferred over to UC Berkeley in the fall of 2005. Direction was hard for me. I mean, being a homeschool kid and then having my father pass away so young, I just didn't have a sense of where the world wanted me or where I wanted to be within the world. I really liked following the path of least resistance. That felt good to me. I liked having my nose in a book. That felt really good to me. It felt like safe. I knew where the first page was. I knew where the last page was. I knew the confines of the thing, you know? And so I would read a lot. And then I met a professor. I took an English class at Santa Rosa Junior College, a professor named Ryan Cooney, who's a bit of like a wandering soul himself. And he just turned me on to books and the way that, I mean, I think I feel similarly about books that I do about wine, in that they present the world in a sort of lens format, a digestible form where you can see so much through it prismatically, you know? And so he convinced me, hey, you should major in English. And then I took a class my last semester at the JC from a guy named Marco Giordano. It was a Shakespeare class, and it just lit me up. His way of reading was so fascinating. He could read a text and make a boring text interesting. He could make an interesting text 10 times more interesting, and he attributed that to studying rhetoric at Cal. That's where he went. And I applied to two schools. I applied to UC Davis and I applied to UC Berkeley. And when I got into UC Berkeley, I kind of couldn't believe it. And Marco convinced me to pursue rhetoric as a minor there. And when I got to Cal, I learned that it was just 2 classes difference between a minor and a major. And I was like, all right, may as well do the double major and tell people I got 2 degrees, you know? So I went to Cal, and that came naturally to me. School there, I liked it, and it wasn't easy. It was hard work. It was a lot of reading, a lot of writing, but I did well. I graduated with a good GPA. I graduated with highest honors in rhetoric. Highest honors in English. I did my honors thesis on pre-Derridian deconstruction and utopian spaces in the poetry of John Donne, which is just like, come on.
That's a very
yeah, totally. It nearly killed me too. I mean, it sent me into like a tailspin of depression and anxiety because I felt like I was just disappointing everyone all the time, that I wasn't working on that thing. I graduated and my wife ended up transferring to Cal as well. She was in the fine arts program there, and art practice. She makes beautiful art. That was really cool to be in school together. It was also odd to be in school together and essentially be married. I mean, we were engaged when I got to Cal. We got married young. We got married in 2006 when she was 20 and I was 22, you know, so we were kids. Graduated 2007. In December of 2007.
That's good timing.
It's great timing. As a double major in the liberal arts, graduating in 2007, what did I decide to do? And as a fairly rudderless homeschooled kid who didn't have like a great sense of direction in the world, I decided I should work in restaurants. And that's where I got my second education, or third education. I think homeschooling, my mom will be proud of this, homeschooling taught me how to learn. It gave me the drive to learn and the knowledge, you know, like the desire to gain knowledge. Mm-hmm. University taught me book smarts and taught me how big the world was. And then restaurants taught me how to actually be a person, mm-hmm. You know. I must have been absolutely just just fucking insufferable at the restaurant. I know I was. I don't think a lot of my coworkers liked working with me. But amazingly, I still have some friends that have lasted from that time. People that saw the good part of who I was and like saw it as something worth cottoning to for a little bit at least. But that was at a restaurant in Berkeley called Jupiter. It was a pizza and beer joint. And they had a tiny little wine program, right? Like 6 bottles by the glass. That was it. Maybe even 4. It was small. And there was a man there. Gosh, I wish I could remember his name. He came and did a couple like educational classes for us. And I pretended like I knew more about wine. That was a through line for me. It's kind of acting like I knew more than I did out of insecurity, which it bit me in the ass a bunch of times. But yeah, hopefully I'm over that. But I kind of positioned myself amongst my friends there at the restaurant as like the wine guy, and whether that was real or not, like I got to be seen that way. And I just kind of felt this passion. And there was a conversation that happened. I was working at Jupiter, and my wife was still at Berkeley. She had 1 more year left. And we were having a conversation in her art studio with this guy who was in the grad program there. And he was talking about wine, and he brought up Sean Thackeray. Sean Thackeray's wine down in California, in Bolinas, and about how philosophical he was, and about all these ideas kind of swirling around the stars, around the moon, around biodynamics, around ancient texts for making wine. And it just kind of lit me up. And I got it in my mind, I'm going to try to work with Sean Thackeray, or I'm going to try to work in wine. And I, again, working in restaurants, feeling a little bit rudderless, I decided, together with Meredith, with my wife, that after she graduated in 2009, we would head back to Petaluma, and I would get into the junior college there and start studying wine. Mm-hmm. So we did that. There's really, in that summer, right before we headed back, we went and saw Animal Collective at the Henry Miller Library in Big Sur, this amazing little venue, like tucked into the hillside there. And we had an extra ticket, and it was like a show that like sold out like that, and the hottest ticket in town, because it was a tiny venue, and they had just released Merriweather Post Pavilion, and like it was a whole thing, and there was a guy who reached out for my ticket, and I was trying to make money on the ticket, so like I overpriced it, and he's like, hey, I really need a ticket. This is a really special place to me and my girlfriend. He ended up proposing to his girlfriend that weekend, and he said, if I can get that ticket, I'll give you face value, but I'll also give you a couple bottles of wine. It's like, oh, okay. That guy's name was Grayson Hartley, and he worked for, God damn it, Grayson, where'd you work then? Manifesto. He was a company winery called Manifesto with a guy named Jamie Whetstone. And Grayson gave me a bottle of Manifesto, and then he gave me a bottle of a wine from a place called the Scholium Project. And the Manifesto looked cool, screw cap, was like Cabernet Sauvignon Tempranillo, something in that vein. Sorry, Grayson, can't remember. And then he gave me a bottle of white from Scholium, and I looked at the bottle of Scholium, and I'm like, it looked like an unknowable object. Just a fascinating label. On the back, it just said California white wine. Didn't tell you where it was from, and it had, I can't remember what the bottling was anymore, but it was a white blend, and it had like a Babylonian name. Like it felt like the things that I felt when I heard about Sean Thackeray, I felt when I looked at this bottle of wine. And so, we had a great time on the camping trip. I got sprayed by a skunk that weekend. If you've never had skunk spray smell on you while being terribly hungover, I cannot recommend it. It's really bad. It's really bad. I was drinking more whiskey in those days than wine. Came back home, back to Petaluma, like literally that weekend we moved to Petaluma, and was looking up the Scholium Project online, and was just fascinated by everything they do. Are you familiar? Do you know the Scholium Project? It's a really wild, it's a former professor at St. John's, is the winemaker, a guy named Abe Scherner. larger than life personality, very, very philosophical. I mean, he was like essentially a philosophy professor, an incredible public orator, and just, very intellectually minded. Very small production, and definitely working in the natural vein and doing it, before people even called it that. I was like, man, I'll do this this school thing, enrolled in classes in fall of 2009. I'm like, I'll do this school thing, but I kind of want to get my hands in the dirt too. That seems really important. I didn't love the program at Santa Rosa Junior College for wine, and that's nothing against them. It was just, it felt stodgy. It felt like very and it didn't capture what I loved about wine, which is this expansiveness, that prismatic sort of thing that wine has. And so I started reaching out to folks. And I reached out to Jamie Whetstone and told him that Grayson had given me this bottle. And I reached out to the Scholium Project, I'm pretty sure. And then I saw that Scholium worked with a vineyard called Hudson Vineyards in Carneros, making wine called Androctonos. And I reached out to them to see if they had a need for an intern. And then another winery called Roche. And I applied for 2 jobs, one at Roche and one at Hudson. And Roche would pay a little bit more, and it would be all cellar work. And Hudson was all vineyard work, no cellar work, and it would pay a little bit less, but have more hours in a longer season. And I had I had a beer with Jamie Whetstone at the Bounty Hunter, or I can't remember, was Backroom Wines? Yeah, maybe it was the Bounty Hunter in Napa. And Jamie and I are sitting there, and I asked him, like, I don't know you, you don't know me, but if you had this in front of you, what would you do? Would you go to Hudson? Would you go to Roche? It's like, well, Roche is going to be cool. You're going to learn conventional winemaking. You're going to learn how to make a lot of wine. And you're going to get that winemaking experience, and it'll lead to other jobs. But Hudson is a special place. And the connections you'll make at Hudson will allow you to do whatever you want in the wine world. And he encouraged me to work at Hudson. And that was really important. I didn't realize how important it was, but I also didn't realize, I do now, how rare it is to actually work in a vineyard. The first thing I did was cluster counts, which is the most boring work you can do. You're walking every 5 rows, every 5 vines, counting clusters on the vines. And you're doing that, this is a 180 acre vineyard. So I did that for 180 acres. It took me like 3 weeks. And I listened to Moby Dick on tape during that time. Finished the book, first time I ever finished it. I had tried that book so many times, and the only thing that could get me through like the cataloging of whales part of the book was 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and it worked. It was great. Did all kinds of great things at that vineyard. Found out that bottle that Grayson had given to me, there was a woman named Kelly McLeod who was the director of viticulture at Hudson Vineyards, that most likely Grayson had stolen that bottle out of her fridge to give to me, which is just kind of wonderful. I love that so much. I have a story eventually to tell you about this bottle, but I like that there's a stolen bottle there. It was a really cool place because not only did I work in the vineyard, but there was also CSA attached. So it was a 7-day-a-week job. 5 days a week I'd work in vineyards, sometimes pruning, sometimes leaf thinning, doing vineyard labeling, in-post labeling. The bulk of the work near the end of the season, and the real reason we were there, was to drive the light boom tractor while the pickers picked. So we'd start work at 10 o'clock at night, and we'd be done at 8 in the morning, and then do sugar sampling, and then be done and go back to sleep. It was wild. It was really wild. And then 2 days a week, we'd pick vegetables, pack boxes for the CSA, deliver them to Oxbow Market, and then be like gophers, helping out with farm dinners and all kinds of things. I got to see the way a vineyard works. And I don't know if you know Lee Hudson, but the man is like a legend in the industry, just larger than life. He has 180 acres planted, or did then, but the property's 2,000 acres at the foot of the, what are the mountains? the Mayacamas, the very edge of the Mayacamas, and right across the Sonoma-Napa border. So right on the Napa side. He could label the fruit as Carneros, but he labeled it as Napa because it was more valuable, which was an important lesson too, right? He loved growing Syrah, and that was, I think, the best fruit on the vineyard, but the fruit that sold was his Chardonnay. That position at Hudson led to so many connections, but it led, we did a cellar visit on a day at the Scholium Project, and it led to an internship at the Scholium Project to finish out the 2010 vintage. So that was 2010. And so 2010, the first part of it, I worked at, I'm just telling my story, I guess. This is good? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. 2010, we worked at Scholium at the end, and that was the first time I ever had my hands in wine and got to see how dirty winemaking could be. You know, fruit flies, lots of cleaning. Like, it's mostly water work you're doing, a lot of bin cleaning and a lot of cleaning up grape skins. I was there for the end of harvest, so I didn't see any fruit come in. I don't believe I saw any fruit come in, but I got to bottle a little bit. The first job I had actually was hand bottling 15 cases of a skin fermented Pinot Gris that had been in barrel for 3 years. Like, what the hell is that, you know? And I thought this was normal wine work, and I didn't realize, my friend Graham, who owns McDonald Wines, which is now very, very special, hard to get, Napa Cab, he was the assistant winemaker there at the time, and he's like, this isn't a real winery. Like, don't, just so you know, like, this is a great place. You're going to learn so much. I love this place. This isn't a real winery. Don't take what you learned here and bring it anywhere else. And unfortunately, I never ended up working in a real winery. I kind of just followed that thread, which is how I'd like it. It was good. 2010, there was no, harvest ends. There's no job. I worked a little bit through 2010 helping out with, I guess this was the really cool thing about Scholium. I got to do everything, So at the end of harvest, bottling, barreling down, or barreling down, a little bit of bottling. And then they would keep me on for a few hours here and there. It wasn't too far from where I lived, 45 minutes away. The winery was in Fairfield, and they were split, interestingly. They worked with Napa fruit, but they also worked with like Sassoon Valley fruit. So, and the naming structure largely was anything from Napa had a Greek name, and anything from Fairfield in that area had a Babylonian name, right? So it's like, come on, how doesn't that just, like, for a rhetoric major, you're just, come on, like, it just felt so magical and mystical and special. Yeah, I learned later on that the reputation the winery had was a little bit like, hey, some wines are incredible, some wines are just absolute horse shit. But I thought they were all great. I had fully drunk the Kool-Aid at that point in time. I thought they were all great. I just really loved everything about it. But I got to do everything. I got to see the off-season work. And then the next season I worked at Scholium too. 2011, I was invited back as for a title that doesn't actually exist, but head intern. I was head intern. There was one other intern, and I was told she was my intern, which is ridiculous because she's Courtney Humiston, who makes Delphinium wine, that white label on or blue and white label on the shelf, and now she's the Sonoma County and Pacific Northwest writer for James Suckling. So like.
You taught her well.
I get it's not true, Courtney. I learned more from you. She's not going to watch this. So 2011 was really cool. That's where I really felt like, okay, I understand this wine thing. Like, I feel like I know how everything works in this winery. It was also the most atypical vintage in Napa because it was so cold. We were just waiting and waiting and waiting for fruit to ripen, and it barely did. And it turned out that would be a stylistic pivot for Scholium. They were they made a Petite Syrah in like 2009 that was 17.8% alcohol, naturally. Just massive wine, 3 years on the lees and barrel called Brico Bebelico. I had like one glass of that, got hammered. It was just intense. But that year, naturally, their alcohols came down. They had to. They just couldn't get them up. And there was a stylistic shift, understanding that, like, you don't need to have like complete excessive ripeness in the vineyard in order to express a sense of the place. This was a weird time for me too. In 2010 through 2012, I was in like, I'd gotten my beak wet with wine, right? You know, I knew I loved it, but I still didn't have that rudder, and I still didn't know how to pursue the next job. I didn't know how to market myself for that next thing. And so I was just kind of waiting for harvest. So while waiting for harvest, I worked. We were living at this time. We moved back from our place in Berkeley back to Meredith's parents' house. They built a little shack in the back for us to live in. We had to use the bathroom inside. I peed off of that deck a whole bunch of times. It was wild to be like a married couple and felt like we had regressed a little bit. And I think we both felt insecurity about that. Me more than Meredith, myself more than Meredith. I think I just had insecurity about being a husband and not providing and not. But I think it's important to remember I was a kid too. I was young looking back. It feels so formative and funny now, but it definitely felt like a time where I'm like, okay, wandering in the desert a little bit. I built guitar pedals at a place called Mission Engineering in Petaluma that my friend Steve got me the job at. Honestly, we spent more time smoking pot than we did working. But it was a lot of fun. They had like a really amazing rig set up, and we would play music together. There's a drum set, and it was just like fun and free, and felt I think actually felt like more like ruminative than I gave it credit for at the time. You know, it's kind of like thinking in the shower. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's like wasting time, but you're actually doing a lot of production or pre-production probably, mm-hmm. Right? You probably had a lot to think about before you come and do one of these, mm-hmm. Right? So 2011, 2012, so 2011 all at Scholium, and then it kind of run its course with Scholium at the end of 11. There was a wedding in early 2012, I think it was, maybe at the end of 2011, I think early 2012, for the director of operations at the Scholium project. And at that wedding, I saw a dude who I knew. I saw Grayson again. He showed up at the wedding. And I'm like, holy cow, you're the reason I'm here. That bottle you brought across the river that one day at the Animal Collective show we were camping, like, that's the whole reason I'm right here. And we had a great discussion. And he was the one who told me, he's like, look, Scholium's awesome. Love the wines. Nobody should like all the wines. If you like all the wines, you drank the Kool-Aid. All right. That's the first time I heard that phrase. And I like had that thought kind of stuck with me of like, okay, love the thing, be passionate about the thing, but don't lose your critical edge. Like, it's important to maintain that sense of not distrust, but like, yeah, suspension of disbelief, or suspension of belief, I guess. Mm-hmm. And so I had kind of felt, I love Scholium, but I can't just stay here. There's not like a career for me at Scholium. I need to think about other things. But I still knew I wanted to work a few harvests. And so 2012, I started looking for actual work. I was feeling in a morass. I never wanted to work in restaurants again. Being at Jupiter was great. I liked it a lot, but I also just hated that sense of having to be on all the time and having to like, feeling like you had to like self-medicate with drinking after a shift in order to kind of like, you know, expunge or purge what came before. Not like literally. Mm-hmm. I just want to be clear, but like emotionally. But that's what I knew how to do. And so I applied for a few restaurants. I found a few restaurants that seemed cool. And I applied to two in particular, one up in Healdsburg called Scopa, and then one down in Petaluma called Rosso. And I was hired at Rosso. And that was like summer of 2012. And I told them at the start, hey, I want to work harvest, so just so you know, my schedule will need to be, you know, modified. And at Rosso, at that point, I had learned enough about wine that I was definitely like the wine guy. People like trusted me for wine knowledge, and that felt great. It felt like I had gotten somewhere, like I had known something a little bit, you know. And then a month after working at Rosso, I got a call from Scopa saying that they're opening a new restaurant, and that they had found my resume from like 6 months before, and they'd pretty much hired for the team, but they liked my resume and they would love, you know, to have me come in for an interview. And so I went into Scopa and found out the new restaurant was a place called Campo Fina. And I told them, you know, stipulation that I'd be working harvest. But they're like, man, we'd love to have you. And it felt great to be desired, right? And so Scopa opened April of 2012. So I guess this wasn't summer, but timelines are funny. Campo Fino opened April of 2012. I started working there, and then Harvest started in August, and I worked at Harvest at Wind Gap in Sebastopol. Wind Gap now is known as PAX, and before then it was known as PAX. It was this brief gap of time where it was Wind Gap for legal reasons. But Wind Gap was an amazing place. The assistant winemaker was a guy named Ryan Glab, and he had his own label called Rhyme. Him and his wife, Ryan and Megan Glab, had this label. It was the second, there's debate about that, vintage for the cellar master, a guy named Scott Schultz, who has a winery called Jolie Led. And these are all like now very well-established wineries in California. This was a real incubator. One of my co-interns is a guy named Chad Hines, who started Method Sauvage and now Iroquois. And Chad's a good friend of mine. We've done a couple events with Chad here in the shop. And one of the partners in the cellar, one of the people who worked in the cellar was Sean Thackeray. Right? So like, got to see Sean Thackeray there and like realized like, he's passed away, but like realized that his winemaking wasn't as radical as I thought it was. Like he was doing a lot of what we were doing with Wind Gap, but even more so. Like it was the first time I ever saw someone hook up a sulfur sprayer into the destemmer and just had a constant stream of sulfur spraying on the fruit as it was destemming. I'm like, oh, this isn't natural wine. And I learned about marketing, right? Marketing's how you tell your story is really important. That draws people in. Ultimately, the thing itself, to everyone, not to everyone, really, really matters. So worked for the first few months without being at the job at Campo Fino, the restaurant, or without having the Harvest job. I worked 3 solid months at Campo Fino, and then Harvest kicked in, and I went down to 2 days a week at Campo Fino and 6 days a week at Wind Gap. 7 days a week at Wind Gap. We were there every single day. We were there 7 days a week, yeah. And then 2 shifts a week at Campo. It was intense, but we didn't have kids, and money was really helpful. It felt really good. And by the end of the year at Campo, I was made the wine buyer, the wine director. And it was a crash course, man. That was the first winter for a restaurant in a tourist town where summer is the thing. And I the owner, Ari, who I love dearly, I have the utmost respect for Ari. He's a good man who cares deeply about community and taught me so much about community. He also didn't have the time to really show me the ropes of wine buying, and I probably seemed like I knew more than I did too, because that's how I would present to people. And I remember him calling me up just absolutely livid one day, saying, "Hey Michael, there's no fucking wine in the back room. There's not a Zinfandel on the list. There's not, there's nothing here. What are you doing?" And me frantically picking up cases on my drive from Petaluma to Healdsburg, stopping at wineries and being like, "Hey, I need this. Can I send you a check on Friday?" And just like I learned then about inventory, that like just buying things you think are cool, that helps, and that like has some sense of like magnetism for people, but you need to have balance. You need to make sure your inventory is evenly stocked. You need to have a plan for the future. You need to make sure that you have contingency plans, right? Just because you don't like something doesn't mean someone else won't, and also doesn't mean you don't have a responsibility to find the good version of that thing. I'm not a Petit Syrah drinker, but if I had a Petit Syrah on the shelf, I don't. But if I did, I would make sure it was a really good Petit Syrah, and something that I trust, respect. I worked at Campo Fino from 2012 through the end of 2016, and they had a sister restaurant around the corner, the one I mentioned before, Scopa. And I became the wine director at Scopa for the last year. It was open too. Both restaurants are closed now, sadly, kind of pandemic stuff. Greedy landlords, rent increases, all those things. Tired owners. Ari was a chef and owner of both, and he was a very active chef owner. Like he was on the line on a Friday night, and he had kids. But he knew the value. That was another huge lesson, the value of being present as an owner. People are there for you. They're there to see what you do, to see your created and curated thing. And they want a piece of that. They don't just want absenteeism. But it was really great. At Campo Fino, I got to kind of create a more expressive, more personally idiomatic kind of wine list. And at Scopa, I had to play politics a little bit more. Scopa had this really interesting model where they did winemaker Wednesdays, winemaker waiter Wednesdays, where every Wednesday a winemaker would take over the list, the by the glass list, and then they would be on the floor as a waiter. It was a tiny restaurant, smaller than here, like smaller, like from the bar over to the wall, just a shotgun, all handwritten tickets handed through the window, very old school. I loved it. And people adored it. It was such a cool place. We do 3 turns every night, and the money was like very like predictable. And there it was, at Campofina, I could say, oh, well, your wines just don't fit, that kind of thing. You could say that to some of the old school farmers. But at Scopa, like you had to have certain wines on the list because they came into the restaurant and they spent 20 grand a year, there's a little bit of give and take and yin and yang there. And I dug that. I mean, I hated it at the time, but I dug what it taught me, which was furthering that idea of like, it's not just about you. You're not the center. Even if you have to be the center, you need to be able to like express the love elsewhere and share and make concessions. I worked harvest the whole time I was working at Campofina and Scopa. I mean, during harvest periods, up through 14. So I worked 12 at Wind Gap. I worked 13 then up in the Anderson Valley at a place called Canez, which also doesn't exist anymore, but it's where they made the Anthill wines. And I worked 13 and 14 at Anthill. Actually, 14, Anthony Filiberti was the winemaker there, and he was instrumental in us coming up and checking out the Oregon wine scene. He had worked at Bergstrom, and he had told me, hey, you got to go visit Bergstrom. We had friends that lived up here in Oregon, and we visited them for the first time in 2014. They lived near the old Zupans on Belmont, that's now H Mart, and right there near Laurelhurst. And we went out wine tasting with them, went up to Bergstrom, tasted Sigrid Chardonnay, and I was like, whoa, what is this? This is really special. Went over to Avalon, I think, when they were at their old location. I think it was Avalon. I didn't have any sense. Asked if they had any Thomas, because I'd heard that that's the thing to get, and I got laughed at. Just like that. And instead got sold a bottle of 2012 Arterberry Marsh Pinot.
Not a bad fallback.
Yeah, not a bad fallback. Bought that. Bought a bottle of 2012 Dundee Hills Pinot as well from there. And came home with those bottles and left feeling like, man, I love Oregon. I love Portland. One day we will live there. Like that is our speed. That is our town. 2014 came and went. 2014 was my last harvest because my wife was pregnant. In 2015, we had our first child, my daughter, Auden Elliott, born April 14th, 2015. And that changed everything. Yeah, I knew once I had a kid that I wasn't super long for the restaurant world. And both my wife and I's careers started going places, it felt like. I was the wine buyer at 2 really well-established and really beloved restaurants in town. My wife became the events director at a winery called Arista in the Russian River Valley, right on West Side Road, across from Rocchioli, highfalutin territory, right next door to Williams-Sellium. Which, by the way, that was actually my come to Jesus moment, was a bottle of 04 Williams-Sellium West Side Road Neighbors Pinot Noir. That wine was the first moment. I mean, the Guigal was important, the Shug was important, but the 04 West Side Road Neighbors was like, that's wine. That's magical. That's something special. Meredith had that job as director of events. Essentially doing lots and lots of weddings. And they had a position there called the estate sommelier position. And the estate somm was in charge, essentially was the director of private hospitality. And the person that was there, a really good dude named Lalo Vela, Lalo left, and I kind of saw an opportunity. My wife had a salary there and had benefits. And I thought, man, I'd like those things. And also didn't work nights. And so I inquired, I'm like, hey, hun, would you mind if I worked at the same place as you? And she said, no, I'd love that. That was a mistake. That was a mistake. We don't work well together. I don't work well with her. She's great. I'm not a great coworker. And she was like, yeah, that's cool. And then I asked the owners, Mark and Ben, about it, and they're like, come in for an interview. We'd be stoked to have you. And that's what I did. So at the end of 2016, transitioned from the restaurants. Told Ari, sat him down after doing my tastings one day, saying, "Hey, I need to put in my notice." It's bittersweet, but he got it. I think as a dad, he really got it. And then started at Arista, and I was there for a couple years. We had our second kid during that time. We bought a house during that time. Like, it really felt like white picket fence, dog, house, that whole life. We visited in 2016. We visited Portland for the second time. Our friends were in the process of buying a house at that time. Miriam and Chris, the friends we came up to visit, and they lived in this amazing community, kind of intentional community. There were 3 row houses right next to each other, and they had ripped up their backyard, so they didn't have a backyard separated anymore. It was one big backyard, and they all made the choice to live in kind of intentional community, do things together, share wheelbarrows, ladders, watching the kids. They didn't have any kids at that point. No one had any kids, but they made this kind of idea before kids. No sharing of spouses. Everyone always asks that question, right? It's not that kind of community. And Miriam and Chris were looking for a place to live. They were looking to buy a house, and during that time, they just lived with each of the 3 families, kind of, for a couple months at a time. Very cool, very open, very honest, authentic relationships. And we got it in our heads that we wanted a piece of that. Like, we would really love that. And it cottoned with being here in Portland. It's like, do that in Portland? That's perfect. That's the dream. But we felt that was like a thought in 2016, but then everything kind of happened in 2016, 2017 was like, oh, we're here. Mm-hmm. We lived in Santa Rosa. We were about a 30-minute drive from our work at Arista. My wife and I could commute together most days. The grandparents lived in Petaluma. We're making it work. And then the fire in 2017 just put us in a state of trepidation, insecurity. The fire came about a mile from our house. We weren't in an evacuation zone because we were right near the Central Police Station, Central Fire Station, and the one hospital that wasn't evacuated. And so they were holding that line really tightly. But it gave us it was scary. And it made me feel really concerned about climate change. That was the thing, water insecurity. I had always had a hard time with sun. It's just not my thing. I don't love it when it's super, super hot. And I don't mind it. I love it in summer, actually. But to have a day in January where it's 85 degrees down there, and once the sun comes out in early March, it's not leaving until early November, it started to feel not like paradise, but sort of oppressive. And at the same time, the community felt there were some great friends we had, but we all were driving distance away from each other. We would talk about getting together for dinner so much, and when it would actually happen once a year, maybe, and that's part of adulthood. That's just part of growing up and how friendship works. But it still felt like a description of community without community actually happening. I wouldn't say we were disillusioned, but we didn't feel like that was the thing. And more, I found myself really frustrated with the work I was doing. Private hospitality at a winery that sells $60 to $120 bottles of wine. I don't know. I wasn't around my favorite people all the time. I'm gonna tread carefully here.
Very good phrase.
Yeah. I think conspicuous consumption is problematic. There was a van of 15 people. This was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. There was 15 people. Investors, Texas money, oil money. I don't know what kind of money actually. And they spill out of the van after 3 other stops during the day, and I'm taking care of them in this private setting. And I'm told ahead of time, these people have money to spend. They have brand new cellars they want to fill. You can sell the wine to them. They're right there, ready for the plucking. And a guy tumbles out of the van, and he walks up to me and he says, "We ain't good at but 2 things." I'm like, what's that? And he says, "Fucking and making money." And I'm like, cool, what do you want me to do for you right now, And it just felt so gross. They all seemed so gross to me. They were running train back to the bathroom 2 at a time, very clear, what was happening. drugs, I think. Which, whatever, if that's your thing, that's your thing. And ultimately what happened was I didn't seal the deal. I sold 1 case of wine to the group, and I never heard anything about that. No one was disappointed. I told the owners about how they were, and they're like, man, I'm sorry, they shouldn't have been sent to us. That's a bummer. But at the same time, I realized those aren't my people. That's not what I'm interested in wine for. I like selling expensive wines. I like selling wine. It's important to have customers that have the money to buy great wine, right? But in some way, I want them to buy it for the right reasons. Mm-hmm. I'm not here to gatekeep that at all, but I want to show them as much as I possibly can. This is what's special about this stuff. It's not about image. It's not about cachet. It's not about cultural capital, right? It's about that other thing, the prismatic element, Great wines are great wines that cost a lot of money that are totally worth it. All right, so yeah, that group of people left. They left an impression on me, and I think my time at Arista was near the end. And ultimately, what happened is I got fired from Arista. It was the only job I've ever been fired from, and I was fired essentially for insubordination. I just ultimately couldn't tell the same story over and over, and I couldn't tell the story that was designed. I want to be nice to the owners. I think they're good people. But a story that was aimed toward separating, no, that's not it. Aimed toward image, aimed toward opulence, aimed toward luxury. The wines are very good. They're very good. But the story's better than the wines. Mm-hmm. The story's bigger than the wines, and the story sells the wines more than the wines sell themselves. I think that's true. I think that's true of even great wines, and they can be great wines, whatever. I don't need to split those hairs, but story matters, but I want the thing to stand up as an object without the story surrounding it, and without the phatic story. It's important that the quality of the vineyard, of the farming, of the people, of the history of the place, that's really important. That's hard to find in the new world because we're just not that old, So it's 2019 when I lost my job. It was the 2 days after my daughter's 4th birthday. Yeah. And it sent me in a little bit of a tailspin. I've always been prone to anxiety and depression. That's my makeup. And I just didn't know what to do. And I searched for a bit. And then in, I think, July, our friends who live up here in Portland, they had, in 2017, right around when we bought our home, they had bought a duplex, a new build. And they posted on Instagram, hey, our friends are moving out of the other side of the duplex. Anyone want to live there? And Meredith and I were like, we do. This is how we get to Portland. This is how we get into this community. This is how we get to the place we love. And so November 2019, we moved to Portland. We live in Southeast in Montevilla. And it's almost immediate. I mean, we had a leg up with the community that was there. People had kids at that point. We had 2 kids. So in December of 2017, just a year after starting at Arista, we had our 2nd child, Dylan Genevieve. December 28th, 2017. She's a Spitfire. We moved up kind of on a wing and a prayer. We didn't have jobs. And I was done with wine. During my time of unemployment, I had applied at a few places, and I'd gotten some job offers. One as an assistant tasting room manager, in Sonoma Valley, and I bought clothes for it. I bought a tie. I was going to do the thing. And I was sitting at Russian River Brewery, which was just down the street from our house, having a pint of beer and a slice of pizza. And I had the realization suddenly, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. And a couple weeks later was when the house thing happened. Mm-hmm. So we sold our house, moved up to Portland, and had no idea what we were doing. I started applying for brand management, copy editing, and copywriting positions. I'm like, I got an English and rhetoric degree. I have restaurant experience. What the hell am I gonna do? I can words, so I should words. And yeah, heard nothing, because turns out this town is chock full of people who can words, and like people who work for less money than I needed to make. The jobs just aren't there in the same way. That was really striking to come here and be like, ooh, the job market is really different than in California. Portland's a different kind of place. I started, as we all do during the pandemic, started baking bread. I started selling it though, delivering bread. I started a little brand called Mutual Bread. Yeah, right. Very 2020. Delivering bread all over the place. We pivoted. It was a great place to be during the pandemic because we kind of had a natural pod built. All of our friends who had kids who were professional, public speakers, engineers, entrepreneur, lawyers, nurses, like runs the gamut of what people did. All of their daycares closed. And so my wife, who loves children and has a lot of experience, we were both camp counselors. She was a really good one. I was an okay one. Had a lot of experience like with kids. She was like, hey, how about we make our home the home daycare for everyone? So we like sustained ourselves by our friends, trusting us with their children. It was awesome. And I'm delivering bread, she's doing that. And one day I'm like, man, we were going back down to California to visit our friends Ray and Taylor, who we worked at Arista with. And I thought, I'd love to bring a bottle of really great Oregon Pinot, maybe with a little age on it to them. And then I remembered Thomas. And I looked online and realized this shop, Mount Tabor Fine Wines, had Thomas and had a relationship with Thomas. And I called and asked, said, hey, I know this is a wild question, but any chance you have any older bottles of Thomas kicking around? And it was Melanie who picked up, who worked here at the time. And I heard Sandy in the background, who I didn't know yet. And I heard him say, who the hell wants some Thomas? Because it wasn't something, you just gave away. And we started talking for a little bit, and he's like, I think there's a bottle of 13, maybe a bottle of 15. And I came in, and I bought a bottle of 13, a bottle of 15, and a bottle of Coteau Champenois, based on Melanie's recommendation. I was in here for like 45 minutes and started talking, with Melanie, shooting the shit, and she asked what I did. And as I'm walking out the door, she said, hey, I'm going down to California to work harvest in the Santa Cruz Mountains at Reese in a couple months, and we need to find someone to take my position. Are you interested in a job? I said, maybe. My unemployment's running out. It's getting too hot to bake bread in my kitchen. Yeah, this sounds, this sounds like a good idea. And she got back to me like a week later, and I interviewed with her and Sandy. Broadly interview. I gave them my resume, and they're like, "You're hired. We'd love for you to be here." Got hired. Started like 2 weeks before she left. She trained me for a week, and as she's walking out the door, again after training me, she's like, "By the way, I do think Sandy's interested in selling this place. If you're ever interested in that." Thought was in my head, right? I couldn't get it out. So I started working here. I did everything kind of from the jump. Sandy was a little bit older. He was in his 70s. He was on his way out, in terms of the wine industry. He wasn't here. I worked 2 days in the shop with him, and he covered for me 2 days. And I think that was the only times he worked in the shop for the year and a half that I worked for him here. And at the end of that first year, at the end of 2020, around Christmas time, I asked Sandy, point blank, I said, hey, would you ever be interested in selling the shop? And he said, yeah, and I think you'd be the exact right person to buy it. And so we kind of started putting a plan in place. Sandy didn't want to do any of the work of estimating the shop's value or figuring out how to make any of that work. So my job, in addition to working here at the shop, became figuring out how to buy a wine shop. Luckily, I had lots of friends who worked in real estate deals, friends who worked in law, and got a lot of great counsel. And it took a year of negotiation and figuring out the thing, but we got it done finally with a lot of back and forth, and a lot of drama at the 11th hour. A lot of drama at the 11th hour. But got it done. And January 1st, 2022, I became the owner of Mount Tabor Fine Wines, which if you've never owned a retail wine shop, I don't know if I'd recommend it. But I love this place. So we kept it as Mount Tabor Fine Wines. We kind of dropped the fine, not from the signage, but from all correspondence early on. And then a year later, in March of 2023, we renamed it to Taborly Wines.
Why?
Yeah, great question. Yeah. Fine Fine is a fork in the road for fine wine. Fine wine for some people, I think I'm right in the middle. People my age and older say, oh, that denotes quality. People younger than me say, that denotes stuffiness. That's a hand saying, don't come in. This business had a great male customer base, M-A-I-L and M-A-L-E, it's the wine industry. But a great mailing list, customer base. We send out offers on things like Thomas, Arterberry Marsh. It's kind of amazing how full circle it is, right? Like, I'm getting to that. But the walk-in business had atrophied in a big way. There wasn't much to invite people to come into, And Taborly, I like puns, I like dad jokes. And Taborly, neighborly, felt really good, feels hyper-local, pays homage to the previous name, Mount Tabor Fine Wines, but the updated branding says, hey, we're fun, we're a good time. I nearly changed the name to Mount Tabor Fun Wines. And in fact, the LLC is Fun Wines Limited Liability Company. But then I thought, man, could someone, in all seriousness, buy a Grand Cru Burgundy from a place called Mount Tabor Fun Wines? Probably not, I need to keep that. I need to keep that option in the back pocket. The place wasn't selling much Grand Cru Burgundy at the time. It is now, though, which feels cool. Yeah, but Taborly, neighborly. I want this place to be like a hub, and then emanate from that a sense of community, a sense of belonging. I want people to feel a little bit cheersy here, but I want the people that walk in for the first time to also feel that as well. I want people to see the energy of the place. I want it to feel good, We repainted that red was kind of everywhere in the shop, and if you go in the bathroom, there's like a Chardonnay yellow, very like Tuscany 1995 kind of energy. And we repainted to a soft pink, lighten it up, brighten it up, give it some freshness. We changed up the art on the walls. We change it up all the time. And obviously got really great branding from our friends at Variety Shop, who now live on the East Coast, but their stuff is amazing. And just kind of tried to bring some youthfulness. Just bring positivity. And really the important part for me is get rid of the gatekeeping element in wine. Wine is it's so fraught with this weight, this past weight that people bring to it of it needs to be up here. It needs to be treated with importance and respect, and it needs to feel stuffy. And I just don't buy into any of that. I think wine's for everyone. My kiddos both tasted wine at very young ages and liked the way it tasted, and that tells me that it's universal. That this is a thing that's purely delicious first and foremost, and then you can move past that if you want to. But you don't need to know the other stuff in order to get to the delicious part. It adds so much. All of the set dressing is very important and adds so much, but it's not necessary to find your way in, So yeah, we're in our 4th year now, which feels wild to be in our 4th year of Taborly Wines. We brought back Friday night tastings, which were a real institution here at the shop. When Sandy was around, he dropped them in March of 2020. I bet you can guess why, and never brought them back. And we took about a year before we brought them back. I tried to fool around with Saturday afternoon tastings instead, and I just realized people want an excuse to come hang out and let loose a little bit after their work week, and Friday nights are the place where that happens. And they're now pretty popular. We can bank on 40 people showing up every Friday, which for this little space feels pretty good. They're definitely the focal point of the week. And it's a great opportunity for me to send out a newsletter blast and kind of give people my sense of what I think about a subject. Sometimes I phone it in. Most of the time, though, I'm engaged and excited about what we're doing. And we have winemakers here. We have importers, and then sometimes it's just me and my employee Aaron. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at now.
So tell me about it's kind of a twofold question, sort of the wine inventory that you came into and how you've changed it.
Yeah.
And also tell me along those same lines about getting to know the Oregon wine industry as a retailer.
Yeah. So I'm going to start with the second part first. That was part of the draw of the shop is I came here and they had Thomas, and then I saw Arterberry Marsh on the shelf, and those were the two mountains for me. And it's just wild that, now I text regularly with John Thomas and Jim Marsh. Jim Marsh delivers me wine. They're homies. It's really crazy. So I loved I was drawn to the Oregon wine industry because of its sort of like pioneering sensibility that it has. There's a little bit of like chip on your shoulder kind of vibe here. I love the stat that it's only like the 4th or 5th most productive state in terms of volume for wine, but it has the most number of bonded wineries per capita of any state. That to me is really cool. You mentioned earlier, people hear John Thomas's story and everyone wants to be John Thomas. And I think everyone can. Like, I think like I find ambition to be a slightly dirty word. It's not my favorite word. And I think because so much tied into it is this sense of incessant growth, growth that continues on forever. And I don't believe in that. I think our world's a finite place, an infinite finite place, but a finite place. And I think, contentment is the most underrated affect you can have. And I found more contentment here. And maybe some of that is like just kind of repression, but I found a lot of that here. A lot of folks that were really happy being small, happy with their hands in the soil, and still had this enterprising sensibility. The amount of people here who dry farm, the amount of people who work organically, the amount of people who work sustainably with indigenous yeast, ambient yeast, who work with minimal intervention, it's massive. I mean, it's so much more than I experienced in California. And one of the first places I tasted was Evening Land with AJ, when AJ was at Evening Land, and then Tynan was at Evening Land too. And I asked if they had any recommendations of places to go, and they're like, hey, here's the thing, the floor here is very high. Like, it's really hard to find bad wine, and then there's some truly great wine. That wasn't my experience in California, and I was drawn to that. I was drawn to the people, the idiosyncratic nature, this sense of history that was really community-oriented and forged, the Dicks and the Davids doing their thing in the face of adversity. Like, I was lucky enough to go to this lunch a while back, a couple years back, where Dick Erath was speaking, Diane Lett, David Adelsheim, Myron Redford, Jason Lett was there too, and Maria Ponzi. And it was like a panel, and they told stories, and the way they talked about those first few vintages was just like, my gosh, there were so many exit ramps for you. There were so many options to quit. There were so many opportunities to quit, and you didn't. You stuck with it. And I love that. And I just think like it really has left a mark. And people are working that way now. I think about my friend Tyler Magyar, Monument. Like Tyler like goes full throttle, and he has that Oregon spirit in him. Yeah, there's so many people I can name that still have that, and it doesn't seem to have left. It doesn't seem calcified. It feels like an active becoming wine scene, and it would have. There's so many opportunities to just kind of hang your hat on something and be like, all right, this is what it is. It's defined, but it very much isn't. And I don't think anything is. I believe in flux. I believe in dynamism, and I think the California wine scene is very much that, and I think Burgundy is very much that. But some of those places do a better job of acknowledging that and actually living in that spirit than others do. And so getting connected to the Oregon wine scene felt like I was tapping into something that I could still inflect a little bit, and I could still find a piece in. Whereas in California, it always felt like I was subservient to an idea of what something already was. There was no room to actually be an integral part of it, unless you had a lot of money. And here, money, well, it seems really important, but there's just not as much of it. There's just not as much of it in Oregon as there is in California, and so people are scrappier. And I like that scrappiness. The inventory here, people ask that question a lot. It wasn't starkly different. The ethos that drove Sandy is the same ethos that drives me. Great wines, authentic wines from real places. I'm more concerned about the quality of the farming, and I'm more concerned about what the people are like than Sandy was. And I trust my customers more. I trust them to be adventurous, to try something new and maybe dislike it the first time, but then maybe like it the second time, And I think we built up a mutual trust, which is really cool. When I first walked into the shop, it was definitely a shop that was like, not dying, but I asked my friend Cameron, tell me what you think about Tabor Fine Wines, before he knew I was working here. And he said, the first word that comes to mind is dinosaur. And I think it had that sense. And the shelves looked like it. They looked like ribs, you know? Like, where I have the shelves kind of overcrowded with bottles, it was like 1 bottle for every 3 bottle slots. It was very empty, you know? And there wasn't a single bottle of wine over $50 when I took the shop over. It was hard for people to walk in and find something they were interested in if they were looking for something special, you know? So now, I mean, I put a concerted effort in building an inventory, in working with some of the great wines that I think Sandy also saw some wines as being overpriced because he had the enviable position of being able to buy the wines 20 years ago when there was better pricing. And I think it's hard to get out of your own head about knowing what something used to cost, right? You know, knowing the value it was. But people are still ready to buy Chauve. People are still ready to buy Dujac, you know? People are ready to buy Antica Terra, right? So I made a concerted effort not to raise pricing on the shelf, but to add more variety in every direction. And then definitely more of a focus on natural wine. I'm not dogmatically a natural wine head at all, and I don't have a tolerance for, I don't want to call them flaws, but like I want wine to be made with integrity, and I want it to be made skillfully. I think that's very important. That needs to come first and foremost. But I do believe, right, in the morality of wine, and I think natural farming and natural winemaking has a belief in sustainability and a future-oriented perspective in the world. And I think there needs to be hope, you know, and I think our farmers can give us hope. So my shelves reflect that. People that have idiosyncratic beliefs, people that might not be beloved by their own neighbors, people that might be feared. But I'm into that. Yeah, my inventory is autobiographical. Like it is a small enough shop that I really only put things on the shelf that I like, that I can stand behind. Not every style is my favorite, but I believe in every wine within its style. And I don't care if I can only get 6 bottles of it. If there's 6 bottles now, it's there and then it's gone and something else will replace it. If you liked it, awesome. You want more? I don't have any more, but I can recommend something you're gonna love too. So I think like that's the ethos for me, is kind of trying to curate buy-in amongst my customers into what I'm doing here. I've had enough positive feedback on the wines that I sell that I know that there's good shit on the shelf, and you're gonna find something you like.
So obviously you have a history of building wine lists, being a wine buyer, doing that kind of thing before. How different is it now that it's entirely 100% your decision?
It's freeing, that's for sure, yeah. I don't feel beholden to politics or not politics, but like the local relationships are organic. They're mine. I'm not applying myself to someone else's relationship. I don't have to honor something that came before, which can be challenging with people who have had, you know, SKUs on the shelf that have stuck for dozens of years before, and now they're wondering why their wine isn't there. But that is mostly gone at this point. You know, 3 years is enough time to like kind of wash that away to a certain extent. But yeah, it's freeing. You know, it's nice. It feels good. Friday's my delivery day, and it feels great on a Friday around 2 o'clock when the shelves are plump and new things are in that are lighting me up, and I can see the other things that I've put on the shelf that I really dig. And someone comes in and I haven't seen them in 6 months, and they buy a case or two, and they're like, man, I love coming here. You know, I get to have very immediate, I'm the last person in the chain, right? You know, that wine over there is made in Calabria by 2 brothers. It has to get to a port. It has to get on a container. An importer has to take it in San Francisco or in Seattle. They have to bring it down here. It has to sit in a warehouse with the distributor. And then the wine has to get tasted and ordered by me. And I have to find the thing that sparks me about it and connects that story. And then I get to sell it to the customer. And I get to see their eyes light up when I tell them the story. And then when they come back and want more, I get to see that that excitement. That's awesome. I get to tell so many stories here. That's fun. Every bottle has its story, right? Or a bunch of them, and I love that.
So you said you're in your 4th year now. Tell me about this moment in selling wine and what you're looking ahead to.
Good wine shops are record shops, right? Streaming has come. It's changed the way we consume music. It's changed the way we consume film. But movie madness still exists. Music millennium still exists. There's always going to be places that are like niche. That are going to appeal to someone that wants something tangible and tactile. There's a lot of doom and gloom in the wine industry, and I think it's totally valid. But I think the people that should be the most scared people are the big entities, because they're based on volume, they're based on leveraging debt, they're based on massive inventories, and they're based on not a lot of integrity in the product. There's great products to be found within portfolios, there's great wines to be found at wineries, but not everything is that way when you go large. And so, I've noticed sales slow. I have an aging clientele, we all do. I've seen my case buyers turn into six-pack buyers, I've seen my six-pack buyers turn into bottle buyers. I've seen some of them just disappear. That's something we got to think about. Something I'm thinking about. That's another reason for Taborly, right? Like my customer demographic for the Friday night tastings, since I started doing them again at the beginning of 23 toward now, has probably dropped on average a decade, maybe even 2 decades in average age. I don't want to go any farther, but like it's definitely a younger crowd, and that feels good. They don't buy in massive quantity, but that's okay. Maybe they will one day, or maybe the wine world's just changing and you need more people that are buying single bottles, buying flights to taste. But I don't feel existential dread, other than like the incessant existential dread I always feel. But like, additional existential dread, I don't feel that, because I think there will always be record collectors. And I think there will always be people that want to come in and buy a cool bottle. The biggest competition I have is probably something like WineBid, because that's a place where you can kind of have a facelessness and you can find your individual bottles, and it's like crate digging, right? I'm a new record shop mostly, right? It's important for people. Yeah, I think whatever's happening, collapse, systemic changes, shrinkage, whatever it is, I think small is beautiful, and I think a lot of the solutions to the problems we have in the world writ large can be found in small communities. The danger there then is insularity of beliefs, insularity of experiences. I think internationalism is a good thing, like globalization, understanding that there's a really cool thing happening in Bucharest right now, like that's rad. But I also think like this drinking locally, eating locally, relying on each other for your needs. There's this great concept in like a belief called social ecology about lending libraries of everything, things that are collectively shared. I love that stuff. I love the idea of non-ownership, even though it makes me feel really insecure, deeply insecure. But yeah, I think be authentic, be real, make real connections with your people. Know which people aren't your people, and that's not a judgmental thing. It's just like, hey, I don't have the wines for you, and you don't have the wines for me, and that's okay. We don't do business together, and we don't need to. Not everyone needs to do business with everyone. No one needs to dominate the world. We got a bunch of people that want to dominate the world. We have a bunch of world dominators right now. They mostly suck. Yeah. I won't name names too, but there's wine shops that are run that way, and they mostly suck. It takes you a while sometimes to find out that they suck, but eventually you do. So be a place that doesn't suck.
That is a good ethos to have above the door. Yeah. You mentioned obviously your kind of initial impressions of Oregon during your visits to Oregon and then during coming here. Tell me how you've seen the industry change since you've sort of been aware of it, and where it's going next.
Yeah. I tell people I was born in California, but I've always been an Oregonian. That's my tagline. Gosh, that's tricky, honestly, to say, because since I've been here, I've had my nose to the grindstone. I've been like so down here that like I'm just now starting to look up. I don't get out much. I know the pathway between the shop to my house really well, and I know my kids' faces and my wife's face really well, and I don't see a lot else. I've noticed fewer new producers cropping up. There seemed to be this real big bump in 21 and 22, and maybe into 23 of like new producers with new wines. That's slowed dramatically. I wouldn't call that a good or a bad thing. It just is and is. I've also known some retreat. I've seen some retreat from some of the bigger producers. I interviewed for a job at Jackson Family. Speaking of world domination, We can leave that one in. I didn't get hired. And I interviewed with them, and I told them, hey, just so you know, like, I'm contemplating a move to Oregon. And they were like, oh, that's really fascinating. Like that, we're interested in that because we're expanding our holdings in Oregon. You know, they had bought a number of places, Grand Moraine, others. Yeah, what else? Not Four Graces, that was fully.
Penner Ash.
Penner Ash, yeah. What's the other?
Willikenzie.
Willikenzie, thank you. So they had bought those places, and like they were beefing up their team, and now I understand like they still have those places, but in terms of a marketing team, it's like it's an army of one now here. Like they've done a lot of retreat from Oregon. So there's something in the air. Oregon, I get the sense, and you can see this from like the initial laws that were kind of supported by David Lett in particular. One of my least favorite things, but I also maybe think it's important. There's a lot of tension here. Highway 99 is a bummer, right? And it's the thing that connects the Willamette Valley to Portland. And it's a shorter drive than it is from San Francisco to Napa, or about the same. But there's so much day tripping that happens from San Francisco to Napa, so much communication between that big city and the wine industry. And there's very little here, very little. People, and even our laws are like resistant to change and resistant to expansion and industrialization. And I think some of the bigger companies that have come in here and bought land had thought they could do the same thing they could do in California, and are realizing that it's hard, that it's really tricky. I don't mind that. I love the fact that there's no Total Wine or BevMo in the entire state. Their model doesn't work, right? It doesn't work because I own every bottle in the shop. And I saw friends who own wine shops in California who are under mountains of debt because they have 60-day credit terms that turn into 90-day, that turn into 100-day, that turn into collections, you know? And that can't happen here. Just by law, it can't happen. I mean, I'm sure there's ways you can figure out how to get yourself under a mountain of debt, but it's harder here. Yeah, so I guess those are the two ways I've seen it change. Fewer younger producers, that's a bummer. And a retreat from some of the bigger conglomerates. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I do think the hard part is just the zeitgeist. When you have those kinds of big retreats, or you have something like IPNC ending, right? I never went. It sounded miserable to me to drink Pinot in August.
It's late July.
Okay. Same difference these days. But it does. There is a sense of like, okay, what's going on? Meanwhile, it's still understood, you know, in Texas, in London, in New York, that like the best bang for your buck wine in the entire world is coming from the Willamette Valley. There's a resistance, though. That's the thing I've seen on the customer side. There's a resistance to the creeping prices. You know, newer wineries coming out with their first vintage and their pricing at top tier single vineyard, you know, bottle pricing. Having to do that because land prices are expensive. Everything else has gone up. It's not the values that can exist for some place like Belpont, for instance. Incredibly reasonable pricing for how good the wines are. You just can't make that work if you're Evan Martin at Martin Woods. And he even got in on some stuff that newer people haven't been able to, like more recent additions to the industry. It's hard to make a buck here. And I think people are realizing that.
So let's talk about the future a little bit for yourself then, professionally or personally. Anything on the horizon you're looking forward to?
I'm a slow mover. I'm looking forward to launching an actual website at some point in time. I don't have one. I don't have an online web presence.
I enjoyed the coming soon.
Yeah,
it looks good.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's been coming soon for 3 years. I'm going to launch a wine club soon. I'm looking forward to that. These are all like minor little things for Taborly. I think the dream, as I just spent like an hour screeding against expansionism, I think the dream would be to have a second location in a place like Bend or Ashland. I'd love that. I'd love to spread. I'd love to make this like totally sustainable for my family, and to be able to pay myself enough to like go on vacation, live a comfortable life, which it like almost does. But I'd really love to I love seeing the the energy in the wine world, especially on the retail level and in restaurants, that feels like it's, you know, it feels like it's discarding some stuff that should be discarded from the past, and it's engaging energetically with the future. And I'd love to just be more and more a part of that. I'd like to have hard conversations that aren't facile about natural wine, about regenerative farming, about sustainability, about history, about land ownership, about the health benefits of drinking wine, or maybe non-benefits. And I just think having like beacons in various places feels good. It doesn't need to be me, but like one more place to do that would be cool. I love Oregon. I wouldn't want to move out of Oregon. Too insecure to figure out how to do business anywhere else. But I've got to figure it out here, more or less. Yeah. What else in the future? I mean, I'm thinking, you know, I got kids that are 7 and 10 now. I'm thinking about what the world looks like for them. I'm thinking about college. What does college look like for them? For one of them, it's only 8 years away. Crazy. My wife is starting grad school this summer. She's a paraeducator right now in the Portland public school system. She's going to be a teacher. She's going to be a damn good one. So thinking about that, and kind of, it sounds ridiculous, but about the comfort it'll give our family to have her teacher's salary support us too. Kind of gives you a sense of the world. Just thinking broadly about the future. Not a whole lot of takeaways. I don't feel insecure about it because I think there'll always be people who care. Maybe that's naive, but I think if you put that energy out into the world, in some ways it returns to you. It's probably naive.
In a good way.
Yeah, I think in a good way. I believe, you know, I talked about like my Christian upbringing, and I would still call myself a Christian. I still have, I still very much have a faith. It's very different. It's very different now. But I believe in this idea that even if it's impossible to get there, you have to aim your arrow toward heaven. You have to believe in the idea of a paradise. You have to believe in the idea that things can be better. And even if it can't happen in your lifetime, even if you can't actuate it, even if it is naive in some way, by acting as if it is possible, you're one more person creating the possibility of it actually existing. If more people acted in that manner, these things that seem naive to us and seem, you know, kind of milquetoasty and idealistic would actually be achieved.
One more question for you.
Yeah.
You talked about, obviously, morality in wine. Now, the term, I think something you've returned to a couple times during the conversation. I'm curious about, from your introduction to wine to now, has your definition of that changed, and have you noticed more or less of it around you in the industry?
Yeah, I didn't think about it. I didn't think about it till relatively recently. I went to Burgundy in October with my friends. You've interviewed two of them, Simon Lowry and Mark Catelli. So Heavenly Creatures and Petite Mon, and then my friend Chris Foley, who is one of the loveliest dudes in the industry, but he's not one for the camera. Not one for the facing thing. We went to Burgundy, and I was really just struck. You know, Burgundy's up here, right? It's the pinnacle, and you can do it in a really flashy way. But we spent most of our time in the Côte de Beaune and South, Macon. Spent our time with farmers, and one of the very first things we did there was go to a natural wine fair that was mostly young folks, but some older folks too. And I was really smacked in the face with how little it had to do, natural wine for them. So natural wine here is so aesthetic based. It's so aesthetics of labels, aesthetics of what a wine tastes like, you know? I joke that like a lot of natural wine just tastes like "fuck you, Dad," you know, like, right? And that's what people want. They're like, I don't want it to taste like what my dad drank. Understood. I get that. Punk rock wine, that's great. I love the punk rock energy, but punk rock without actual ethos and politics behind it is, again, just facile. There's no there. And I was struck by how little the aesthetics had to do with it in Burgundy. How internal that punk rock energy was. And the energy at the fair just made me start to think about the morality, about the actual work it takes, the backbreaking work it takes in the vineyard, what fair compensation looks like for that work, and how it confounds conceptions of luxury that we have attached to wine, actually paying people fairly along the whole process. And it made me think about, okay, why isn't that real like internal sense of doing good, of doing work that changes the world, that changes the lives of those around you? Why doesn't that exist here in the same way? And I think it does for some, but I think there's ancient history there. There's a common enemy to rebel against, even if it's from the late 1700s. That like sense of the bourgeoisie still like exists as an enemy, or at least as like a shared like non-ally. And I just think we need more champions here. So that I don't see myself necessarily as a champion per se. That feels like a big mantle to wear, but like I can speak up. And I can see it now. I can see that what we do matters, and that what you do in the vineyard matters, and then what you do in the cellar matters, and how you choose to consume and where you choose to spend your money matters. One of my favorite philosophers is Michel de Certeau. He wrote a book called The Practice of Everyday Life, and he talks about the difference between the voyeur and the flaneur, the person looking and seeing the grid-like city, and the person who actually moves through it, and desire paths, and skateboarders, and things like that. The way we interact with the space inflects what the space is. And winemaking and wine purchasing has been dominated by the voyeur for so long, and I think it's the time of the flaneur. And so, just realizing that, I'm like, okay, how do I spend money? Like, I will always, this is anyone with a new project, I will always spend money on a 6-pack of a new project. I want to support people that are doing something new, something exciting, and bootstrapping it, I won't always rebuy. The wine doesn't always work, but like, I will always, cut a check for a few $100 to help you out, because I want to see that energy. I want to see people. I want people to feel like they have some allies in the industry, especially if they're doing good, meaningful, moral, change-driven work. So it's less about like my idea of morality changing in wine, and more of like it just kind of bursting on the scene for me and becoming like a guiding light. Maybe that's the answer to the question about the future. Is I just see that more and more like as a guidepost or a light post. I don't know, a beacon of a place to go. Of it's so hard to make money as a potato farmer, and you end up going on massive scale, right? 1 million acres, GPS-driven tractors, awful agrochemicals that started off as weapons of mass destruction of war that we now spray on our food, and the only way they can make the profit margin is so small. The only way they can make money is by retreating, or by resorting to massive scale, and that doesn't have to happen in wine. And so wine to me is like, okay, there's a path forward here. I believe a little bit that our food prices are too cheap. Maybe not a popular opinion, but like, I think there's something in wine that maybe doesn't modify everything around it, but maybe shows some pathways forward.
Fantastic answer. Thank you for that.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for asking the question.
All the questions that I have for you, anything I didn't ask that I should have, anything we didn't cover.
I want to tell you about this bottle.
Okay, tell us about this bottle.
This bottle was drank by my parents when I was born, 1983. And this bottle is a 1928 Coste d'Estournel. It's a Bordeaux, fancy Bordeaux. Yeah. And by all accounts, it was drinking really well at that moment in time. And I've come to really appreciate this bottle. It's traveled with me pretty much everywhere I've lived, and it kind of felt like a promise. It feels right that I'm back, like I'm in the wine industry. But the funny thing about this bottle is my dad stole it out of someone's garage. He was doing some work. I don't know. My dad had some wild stories. He was a wild guy. An immigrant who turned into a full-on acid-dropping hippie, who turned into a conservative evangelical Christian who put his Grateful Dead records very literally in the closet, for me to never find them. And I like that tension and that beauty of this thing that's like a collector's item, that's very special, that a lot of people pursue and is attached to the concept of luxury, that also was, perniciously nicked from someone's garage. Someone, I don't know the full story, but someone who my dad had done business with who screwed over my dad was the sense that I got. And I like that. I feel the opposite pull of a lot of different things in the work I do. I feel, kind of coming at it from two sides, seeing both sides, and I like thinking about what this bottle represents. It has some of that right there in it.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much sharing your story with us, taking the time to show off your space, and sharing your philosophy with us as well. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
We'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
Awesome. Thanks, Rich.
Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure.